Dear Professor Quinn, it's a pleasure to have you here in this big conference. It's an honor and a pleasure. And we have been presented by Jese, in particular by Alberto Ribeira. So I want to thank Jese for this presentation and this connection. And I'm very happy to interview you about the theme of purpose and all the consideration about positive leadership. It's a very pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, thank you so much. So I'd like to start with one consideration that that came from the past. 20 years later, in 2001, you with other two professors of Michigan, you created this positive organizational scholarship with the aim of promoting rigorous and relevant research to represent the best of human condition in organization and in workplace. So now, 20 years later, I'd like to start with the achievement that you think that you have achieved, that you have met, and which are the next challenge for the future.
All right. That's a great question to start with. When we made that change 20 years ago, we basically said the social sciences have a problem. They have a bias. And everybody said, no, we're objective. We said the bias is called central tendency. We have a great understanding of what happens in the middle of the curve, what's normal. We said we need to introduce a new bias, and the new bias orbits around questions like, what are individuals like at their very best? What's a group or team like when it's at its very best? What is an organization like when it's at its very best? And people were very uncomfortable with that, but there were many people who in fact bought in, and so many scholars started doing research from this alternative lens. Today, 20 years later, we have hundreds of studies. If you look across those studies, there are some powerful lessons for the world of practice from that work. And I think the starting point is what we've learned is there's a conventional theory in formal social science. Economics, for example, begins with assumptions like people are individual, rational, self-interested actors. Resources are scarce, conflict is natural, and so on. They're very gloomy assumptions. And the other social sciences have those same assumptions. You and I have a theory right here, just below the chin, that is unconscious, but reflects exactly those assumptions. When we're under stress, we make a lot of negative assumptions and we behave accordingly, and we build conventional organizations. And so there's an alternative. There's a theory of excellence that looks very, very different than that theory of convention. And it's a theory in which people are thriving, leadership is positive, and we're accomplishing great things. And the first reaction from managers is, oh, that's utopian, that's make believe, that's not real. But if we look in sciences like complexity theory and related fields, we find all kinds of evidence that says excellence happens all the time. And so when we turn to a crisis like this, it raises the question about what's possible. And I think maybe your second question has to do with that. Let's surface that question.
Yes, about this point, I will ask you. In time of crisis, it's very difficult to, let me say, to maintain a positive approach, because a lot of companies need to cut costs, to fire some employee, and so I was very impressed about one of your articles in which you wrote, during the time of crisis, we have the opportunity to do the impossible. So my question will be, how we can learn to do this, and how we can create a social excellence.
That's exactly true. That is, in time of crisis is when cultures can change. I just did a book called The Economics of Higher Purpose. We interviewed a number of CEOs of purpose driven organizations. So many of those interviews tied back to the year 2008. 2008 was the year of the Great Recession. And so many of those leaders went into crisis in 2008. What happened to them is they made a discovery that in a time of crisis, people are looking for purpose, direction, and vision. They usually don't get it, and the organization disintegrates. What happens is managers have a fight or flight reaction. It's my job as the CEO to be decisive and to move through this uncertainty. And I try to do it by dictating what needs to be done, including things like downsizing. Um, what happens is the system disintegrates. People become exactly what economic theory says they'll become, self-interested actors, and they're taking care of themselves. The organization just died. So when I make those kinds of decisions, which are natural to make, I'm doing exactly the wrong thing. I'll give you some concrete examples. This week, we had a podcast, and a guy said, "Look at this. This is the director of a hospital in New York City in the middle of the crisis. And look at this statement he wrote to his people. And it was about Dante's Inferno. And it was this incredible vision of what the people were doing and where it was they were going, what their purpose was. At the end of the podcast, the person said, "This conversation's taught me so much. I want to call my clients and share what I've learned, but they're in the middle of a crisis, so I can't do that because during crisis, they're just solving problems, and we just have to let them do that." And I said, "Let me challenge that thought. Let's go back to the beginning of the podcast. Why did you show me this document?" He said, "Oh, because it was visionary." I said, "So we have the head of a hospital in New York City in this crisis who goes home exhausted at the end of the day. All the other heads of hospitals go home exhausted and they go to bed, but he doesn't go to bed. He stays up and he writes a document about their vision. This man is solving problems and providing vision at the same time. That's what a leader's job is in a crisis. Most of us can't see that. We are sucked into the problem solving only, and we go home exhausted, get up the next day and solve problems again. And the organizational culture's dying around us. So this
So,
notion of bringing purpose to culture during times of crisis is a time of opportunity for me as a leader.
so this reflection is very important because this bring even to, let me say, to the personality of a leader and the energy that a leader must have. So in
Right.
time of crisis, maybe if you have a good vision and you have a good sense of the final scope, you have more energy to manage the different things. So my question will be, how, let me say, is important to be authentic in this time of crisis, and even how we can, let me say, show to other people our emotion, our deep sense of believing. What do you think that a leader in this time must, let me say, communicate even in the family, in his, let me say, natural ambient?
Let me tell you two short stories. The first story is about a woman. She's a first line employee in a company. And 12 months after an event, she and I are talking. And she says, "I went to work one day and they brought all the people into the main room and they read a list of names and said, 'Stand up.' These people stood up, and then security guards took them to their desks and then took them to the parking lot. They were downsized." Now, this was 12 months after that event. As she was telling me the story, she was crying and she was shaking. 12 months later, She is still traumatized from what happened. She kept her job, but she's traumatized. And she said to me, for 12 months, I've been looking for a job. I'm still looking. When I find one, I'm going to go. Now, what happened there? There was an authority figure somewhere in that hierarchy. Some other folks figured out that they needed to cut. It fell to this poor person to do the job. What did he or she do? They went to legal, they went to HR and said, what's the procedure for downsizing? What did HR or legal give them? Conventional, safe procedures based on efficiency. The person implemented those procedures, brought in those security guards. And in the process of doing this natural thing, that authority figure was destroying the culture of that company. Now, people say, yeah, but there's no other choice. Let me tell you a second story about an entrepreneur, a man named Ricardo Levy. Ricardo is now retired. He had 2 successful companies. He now teaches at Stanford. Ricardo told me the story about one day he had a huge recession and he had for the first time to cut people in his company. There was no other choice. He went in on the crucial day and he held the meeting and he downsized the people. He fired the people. When he was finishing firing the people he fired stood up and gave him a standing ovation. Now that's mind-boggling. You don't give people a standing ovation for firing you. And I've asked hundreds of executives, how do you explain this? And they freeze. They can't. I say, no, you have 3 minutes. You have to sit down and think about that. Give me the answer. They always come up with the answer. Oh, he was totally committed to those people. He looked for every single alternative. He was totally transparent with those people. When he went in there, he was feeling what they were feeling. He was vulnerable with them. He was showing deep concern, and they knew it. And those, of course, are exactly the right answers. Now, what does that say? Up here, I have a theory that's economic, and people are just widgets to be eliminated. Way down here, there's another theory. Those executives can answer after 3 minutes because they can find this other theory that's way down here. It's the theory of social excellence. It's the theory of positive leadership. In the time of crisis, we have our greatest opportunity to change the culture because during crisis, we can give our people the very best self that we have. When we do, they know it. They then give us everything they have. In all those interviews, that's what the CEOs discovered. That in that crisis, those people, as they treated their people right, those people were giving those CEOs all they had. In fact, more than the CEO could ask for. What emerged was social excellence, and the companies prospered in bad times because everyone was giving more than they had, and they were collaborating, creating an ecosystem that wasn't dictated from the top, it emerged from the bottom because they were getting positive leadership. What we're talking about today, moving from ego to ecosystem, is the greatest opportunity that most CEOs will ever have. But in order to take advantage of it, you have to be all in. You have to be completely authentic. You have to step out of the ego theory that is economics, sociology, and psychology. And you have to step into a theory of social excellence. It is an incredible opportunity.
Very interesting. And so, considering that authenticity is very important for the leadership and for the company, in the last part, if we consider the ecosystem approach, so we have the possibility to have solidarity, generosity, collaboration, and we think that this approach will reinforce innovation, even creativity, and collaboration. Which are, in your experience, the challenges to have one purpose for one ecosystem that is not only for one company? How we can, let me say, incentivize the creation of ecosystem that have their own, let me say, purpose, and how it's difficult to manage different purpose for individual companies?
Okay. I think the process is the same for an ecosystem, a big ecosystem, as it is for a company. Most CEOs do not know what the highest purpose of their organization is, or they have written on the wall a big plastic sign that has words on it. And everybody knows that that's hypocrisy. They've just made the company worse because they created more cynicism. Most CEOs don't know what the highest purpose is. If they do have a higher purpose, they have to turn it into a reality by living it. They at the top team has to live it. Then the middle managers have to live it before the people at the bottom are willing to live it. In order to do that, you have to discover the purpose. And then you have to make the purpose the arbiter of every decision. Most CEOs, their minds boggle when I talk about that you can have a purpose and every single decision is based on that purpose. The moment you do, everybody in the system becomes empowered. Now, take it from a company or an organization to a larger ecosystem. We have a virus that has confronted the world. What an opportunity for Donald Trump or for the Prime Minister of England or Italy or or in China, right? Any leader could have stood up and said, "This is not an American problem or an Italian problem or a Chinese problem. This is a human problem, and it requires eco response." So I'm going to put money into the immediate formation of a scientific network. And I'm inviting Chinese and Italian and English, and I'm going to do everything I can to seed their learning. I'm going to create a system for all the medical people who are providing services to encourage each other in the learning process. And so we're going to provide these information systems for them to tap into. And we're going to put money, we don't know where, we can't be systematic, but as these opportunities come, we'll fund them. And we're going to create a worldwide learning system. Now, where was the leader of China? Where was the leader of Italy? Where was Donald Trump? Donald Trump was talking about making America great again. Donald Trump was doing things that were the opposite of what we're talking about because he couldn't conceive of them. And basically, to create an ecosystem with a higher purpose, either you or me or the person next to us has to stand up and do what those people didn't do.
Very, very, very interesting. Thank you so much. It is the best advice I think that we can give to these initiatives today for the creation of this ecosystem of medium and small enterprise that maybe these companies are the most affected in the crisis. And we hope to give to them hope and a new way for the future. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, because those entrepreneurs are our future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.